Wonderful. We'll go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome. I feel like I've just not left this Zoom space, having done the keynote this morning. So I'm grateful that you all have come in and are here to lift the stories of Black joy in teaching for more and more and more global liberation. So we are grateful you're here. We're excited about the possibilities, and we want to do a quick introduction of ourselves. But first of all, Akwaba, in the tree language in Ghana, this means welcome. So already you've learned your first tree word, Akwaba. The cloth behind it is a Dinkra cloth, which will be referred to several times throughout this presentation. So we're happy you're here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So let me quickly, since I haven't met everyone here, let me quickly introduce myself, and then my colleague will introduce herself. I'm Cynthia Dillard. I currently serve as the Dean of Seattle University College of Education. It's a relative recent appointment for me. I've been here in Seattle for about 4.5 months or so, but coming from the University of Georgia prior to that. But this is also home for me. I was born and raised in Seattle, not far from where I live. And so I'm having a little bit of a homecoming. So I'm just glad you're here and look forward to facilitating this workshop with you.
Welcome, everyone. It's so great to be able to share this virtual space with you, and I'm so honored to be able to co-facilitate alongside Dr. Dillard. I am Cierra Kaler-Jones. My pronouns are she and her, and my heart's work is storytelling for social justice. My official title is Director of Storytelling at Communities for Just Schools Fund, and we are a national collaborative that links the resources of philanthropy to the power of grassroots organizing for racial justice in schools. I'm also on the leadership team of the Zen Education Project, and I come to education work as a dance and art teacher. I've learned alongside babies as young as 2, up through adults. So looking forward to sharing this space and learning alongside you all today.
And listen, you need to know her. You really need to know her. I'm going to do this twice in today's talk, but there is an incredible piece written by Dr. Kaler-Jones that's coming out in that incredible journal, Rethinking Schools, next month. And you need to get it, and you need to read it, and you need to share it. So I just want to say that now, and I'll say it again at the end of our time together, but it's that powerful a piece that needs to be read and shared widely. So a name to know. So we're going to start, you're welcome. We're going to start, I'll start by giving you a little bit of an overview of the workshop. For those of you who were in the Zoom this morning, you heard some conversation about this book, my newest book, The Spirit of Our Work. But in the book, more importantly than the book itself, are 3 concepts that I think are really useful as we think about schools and schooling today. One, especially when we think about schools and schooling that would literally and accurately and authentically serve Black and Brown children, but all children more generously and certainly more relevantly. The first idea that we'll talk about, and these will be embedded throughout all of the activities that we'll do during the workshop, but the first concept or idea that we'll talk about is this idea of an invitation. That part of what joy making and caretaking that we need to sort of think more deeply about is this invitation. How are we inviting children and ourselves to learn? How are we inviting care? How are we inviting joy making? And what place does that hold in our thinking about learning and teaching? The second idea that, again, will be woven throughout all of the activities that we do today will be this idea of a sanctuary. You know, Black folks in particular, but I think all people of color have come to create spaces of sanctuary and joy and liberation for ourselves in spaces that have not necessarily been all that hospitable for us. And so this idea of how do we create classrooms and schools and districts and colleges of education and other entities, how do we create them as spaces of joy and liberation, a space of sanctuary for our students as we and ourselves as we develop more careful ways of curating long histories and long historical knowledge and activity that really resonates with our kids and the spirits that they hold. And then finally, this idea of living a legacy, that all of us are, even as we sit here in this present, we are living legacies that reach back to the past, and we are living legacies that will reach into the future. How do we practice and put into practice this sort of liberatory space and this spirit-filled education, not just for other folks and our students, but for ourselves as teachers and administrators and faculty and leaders as well?
So today we'll start by emphasizing the rich traditions of oral storytelling. We think about the griots that were and are the caretakers of communal knowledge that pass down stories and how we can evoke that in our work. It's so important because textbooks oftentimes leave out the stories of joy, stories of resistance and creativity as a means of denying humanity. And so it is a call to action for all of us to center the joy, the resistance, and the creativity in our own teaching, in our own work, to reclaim those narratives and those stories. And so each picture tells a story, and Dr. Dillard and I will share some of the stories of joy that we've witnessed, we've collected, we've experienced. And while we do so, I would like to invite you as an invitation to put the words, phrases, themes and ideas that sit with your heart in the chat box, almost like a collection of communal data or codes, if you will. So our invitation to you during this next section is to really fill the chat box with the words, phrases, themes, and ideas that really sit with your heart as we do a little bit of storytelling.
All right, so I'll start because these 4 photos are attached to me and they represent incredible joy for me. They're not very clear, so I'll try to paint that picture for you, but they're all taken in the context of Ghana, most of them at our school in Ghana that is a pre-K through junior high school that we've built and curated and live within and share space with 12 teachers and about 160 of the most amazing and beautiful children on the planet. So the first joyful picture, it's going to be hard not to smile during this time, but this first joyful picture is of a young man named Stephen. Stephen started at our school as a preschooler and is now in what would be grade 7, moving into grade 8, middle school. We do a lot of drama and dance at our school in addition to the national curriculum. I knew you would like that part, Cierra. So we also do theater, and the kinds of stories that are told in this theater are stories that have endings and relevance in the community itself. So the children develop stories about everything from what do you call it? Mosquito nets and the importance of taking care of yourself in your home so that you don't get malaria by getting bitten by a mosquito, as all the way up to making sure that you wash your hands during COVID in order to keep yourself clear and safe. So this is a particular story about Stephen serving as the king who comes to make pronouncements to the community about the need to take care of themselves during a anti-malaria kind of program. But it's one that is particularly just incredible to me because he embodied that kingship in a way that really was a little bit frightening. He was so into being a king. So just a really joyful moment of many joyful moments around their theater. The second one picture to my left is of two children. You can't see their faces very well, but this is one of our teachers who teaches our nursery school children. It was during a time when we were outside they were outside, the preschoolers were outside for a lesson outside. And the little baby that you see on her back started crying. And as she's working with other children, they're talking about plants, they're doing all kinds of things. She literally picked this child up without missing a beat, wrapped that child on her back and started to rock him so that he would calm down and be in that moment and be able to enjoy that time together. But it's just such an indication of the kind of caretaking that happens in this school that I am so incredibly proud of and so excited for. That third picture needs no introduction, except to say that the children had just gotten brand new school uniforms. And so what you see in their faces is the pride that they have in these new outfits that they strutted on all the runways at the school that they could find, these new purple uniforms. So that was my joy in this moment. And then that last photo is really an invitation for you to try over and over again. This was a graduate student of mine who tried all day long to get this jump right, to actually be able to propel herself into the air in such a way that she could get that picture of her both up in the air, but also with her hands thrown back to the sky. And I watched her do this over and over again until finally she was able to get the shot that she wanted. So this idea of persistence, she was not going to be denied this jump for joy on the beach in Elmina. So my invitations to Black joy, I hope that in those pictures, you can also sort of feel that Black joy. Oh, Mr. West, yes, relentlessly pursuing joy. Thank you all.
Thank you for welcoming us into those moments of joy with you. And as I share mine, I start on the left-hand side where this was an embodiment of my time in Ghana. It makes me think about the red clay earth, the lush green trees, the vibrant colors of the cloth dancing on the glimmering skin of the people. And this is where I got to stamp adinkra. And it was a remembrance of the creativity of my people, of my ancestors, and actually moving through that process, being an artist, being a dance teacher, an art teacher. So much of what we often teach in arts education is about the product. And this reminded me of the process, all of the intuitive aspects of what it meant to create and to trust in my own creativity and to be a part of a process that had been passed down through generations to generations to generations to be able to ultimately reach me. And so this first picture is an embodiment of my time in Ghana. And my favorite color is pink. So I had to choose the pink cloth as part of my joy practices. On the second to left-hand side, you see me here where I was trying on my handcrafted clothes for the first time. I felt myself standing a little taller. I was laughing a little bit louder, and I was really settling into myself. When I think about my time in Ghana, it was a time where I felt like I was being pulled apart only to be put back together, because there were so many aspects of my own identity, of my own history that I was trying to remember, as Dr. Dillard talks about, that I was ultimately able to tap into. And I'm standing next to Dr. Candace Moore on the left and then Dr. Jillian Martin on the right, who I traveled to Ghana with as part of a study abroad on higher education to decenter Western ways of knowing. And so even though Dr. Dillard and I have recently met virtually, there was a piece of her that had been passed down through the lineage of Dr. Moore and then ultimately to myself. So the beauty of community, the beauty of laughter, and the beauty of connecting with the wardrobe as a form of expression, as a form of art, as a form of creativity, but also as a form of naming who I am and naming who I am not, and being able to reclaim those parts of myself and then show up standing a little bit taller with my shoulders back. The two pictures I have here on the right are pictures of me with some of my students. So the third picture helps me to think about how I come to education work because of them. We were engaging in an artistic exercise, and so many days after school, they would come to the dance classroom and they'd be like, "Miss Cierra, can we talk about Black history at dance because we don't learn it at school? Can we have a girl power day because I want to learn about women's history? Or can we talk about current events because I know things in the world are messed up and I want to be able to change them?" And I never had to teach them that. They knew it intuitively. They were curious. They had these questions that were so deep and so strong about the world around them. But then they would get on stage and they would be so fierce. And there would be moments in the dance classroom where they would wiggle and they would giggle and they would hug and just experience so much joy, even amid asking some of these questions that they had about the world. And so they teach me to constantly be curious, to always wonder, and also as a Black girl, as a Black woman, to never stop pursuing and demanding my own childhood joy, especially as adulthood oftentimes tries to strip and rob us of that. So I claim and reclaim it. And then the last picture here are some baby ballerinas. So a good portion of my teaching experience is with 2 to 5-year-olds teaching creative movement. And so lots of, again, of wiggles, but I think about one story in particular that sits with my heart. And that is the story of Zoe, who came to my class at 2 years old. And we would go through some of the movements and some of the choreography. And Zoe was just doing her own thing. She would just fly, fly through the, the dance classroom. She would be in the corner. She was having a blast on her own, but she never did any of the choreography. And so that also taught me to release some of that perfectionism that oftentimes shows up as an individual, but of course, as a teacher. And my favorite story about Zoe is we get to the final showcase of the year. And Zoe, again, doesn't do any of the choreography, which is fine. And the lights start to go down. I'm trying to get the babies off stage because their dance was over. And Zoe runs into the middle of the stage. She finds the one spotlight. She opens up her arms and she stands in the light. And let me tell you, 2-year-old Zoe to this day always, always, always reminds me how important it is to find our light, to find our joy, and to move in it, to be in it always. And so as we invite you into our moments of Black joy, we would also like to invite you to think about what joy means to you in your own life. And so I'll encourage a moment to engage in some art making, if that feels good and comfortable to you, through an exercise called color symbol image. And this is something that I use with my students all of the time. And so if you might have a piece of paper, or if you want to create this in another way that feels best and most expressive to you, but on a piece of paper or somewhere else, if you might put a color, a symbol, and an image of what joy means to you. And I'm really going to encourage you here to lean into your senses. What does joy look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? Evoking all of your emotions. And part of this is the storytelling work. What stories do we tell ourselves about joy? And knowing that our stories are commensurate with other data that oftentimes gets lifted in school textbooks or in the curriculum. And this is something we should highlight for our students. And I really want to encourage you to lean into those feelings because, as Audre Lorde said, I feel, therefore I can be free. Yes. So let us tap into some creative expression and let us take about 5 minutes here to just pause and to reflect with our color, our symbol, and image. take about 3 more minutes here, and it doesn't have to be perfect or complete. I would invite you to lean into the process rather than the product. 3 more minutes. Hey, thank you all for engaging in that exercise. I would love if you might drop in the chat maybe your color, your symbol, your image, and maybe we'll invite one person to come off mute and share what's sitting with their heart as they move through this activity. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect or complete, all about the process. Mr. West says, image of a child smiling into the sunlight with their eyes closed. I love that. Donna says, it sounds like a belly laugh, the kind we seldom experience after childhood. Love it. Sean says, I guess for me, it is the sounds of nature. Ooh, trees swaying in the wind, running water, etc. I love that. Selena says, my joy is warm and calm. It has peachy green aura, sort of like sherbet ice cream. Oh, I love that. Let's see. Kari says, bluebirds soaring, child's laughter. Oh, Kimberly says, it feels like a mother's back rub. Yes. Gwendolyn says, my mother's smile. These are fantastic. Ooh, Dr. Dillard says it is mashed potatoes and gravy on a warm, sunny day. Carla says the color purple and the book movie music. Ooh, skirts with pockets that you can put your snacks in. Yeah, I just added that part, but also coffee. It feels like freedom and confidence. Yes. Yes, Carla, it is. Those pockets are for the snacks. I love it. Beautiful. Oh, yes. Dr. Raina says, getting your scalp rubbed. Yes, yes, yes. I love that these are coming through the chat box. All of the feelings, the sights, the scents, the tastes, all of it. Beautiful. Thank you all for sharing that in the chat box. And as we continue to invite you into this practice, one thing that will really ground and guide us today that we'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit is the Ghanaian principle of Sankofa, that it is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind. Go back and get it, know your history so that we can know who we are in the present to be able to dream new futures. And as we do that, I'd also like us to embody the concept of Ubuntu, I am, because we are. We are all part of a collective as individuals. And so we would like to invite you into another exercise, which is a collective poem. And so we are creating history every single day. So oftentimes textbooks and the curriculum make things seem like history was just this long time ago, but actually we create it every single day in our experiences. And so when historians write the history of the past 2 years, what would you want them to write? What stories would you like them to tell? What stories would you like to claim and reclaim? And so we'll take a few minutes to draft up our own poetic lines to the following lines. When you tell the story of these past 2 years, write that I blank, let them know that I blank, tell how blank. And so we can just fill in those prompts. I'll put them in the chat as well. Write that I, let them know that I, tell how. And once you feel ready, after you've had a chance to put your poem line together, if you might drop them in the chat for us, and we'll see if we can invite someone in the group to be our resident spoken word poet to bring the poem all together. So it'll take a few minutes here. When you tell the story of these past 2 years, write that I blank, let them know that I blank, and tell how blank. Let's take about one more minute just to wrap up. Anything that you have, again, it never has to be perfect or complete. I always say cookie dough, the idea that half-baked ideas are welcome in this space. So you can just drop your cookie dough right into the chat box. Hey, I see some beautiful poetic lines coming through the chat box. And I would love to invite if someone would feel comfortable to be our resident spoken word poet and read some of the lines that are coming up in the chat box. Leaning into the pause here in case anyone is itching to come off mute and be our spoken word poet. And that's okay if not.
This is Selena. I could read some of our lines here in the chat. I'll be our volunteer.
Yeah, snaps for Selena.
Okay.
Thank
Hope I
you.
do it justice.
Oh, you will. I know it.
Okay. Tell how Black students' voices were heard like thunder. Write that I was revolutionary. Let them know that I kept my people close in everything I did, and tell how I loved and loved and loved. Write that I reconnected our daily act of eating with the joy of sharing the meal on the grass in the shade of the garden. Write that I tried to embody hope, inspiration, and joy in perilous times. Let them know that I am still standing. Tell how we endured together and built stronger, more loving communities. Write that I survived and was protected. Let them know that I struggled and cried, laughed and smiled. Tell how I remained steadfast, reconnected, pushed forward and thrived. Write that I engage abolitionist practices. Let them know that I celebrate joy and healing. Tell them how this is just the beginning of a revolution. Tell how to always search for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, and stand fearlessly and proudly behind it. Write that I showed up in my authenticity as a rural Black feminist. Write that I pushed against my own fears. Let them know that I am unapologetic, and tell how I sparked the flame. I witnessed the creation of community within the chasm of chaos. Let them know that it was fierce and powerful. Tell them that the work must get done. Write that I loved with my full self. Let them know that I watched, I listened, I fed, I respected, I protected. Tell how I refused thin love. Write that I am a teacher, one that teaches to heal, not to bleed. Let them know that I teach myself and others through writing, and writing writes things. Tell how we are bruised, but not broken, because we are still here. Tell how we are still the beloved community in its becoming. Write that I am marching for the same things I marched for in the 60s. My feet grow weary, but my heart is more committed than ever as I march on. We got some more. Write that I found myself in the darkest of hours. Tell them how I've seen more than I can explain. Let them know that I'm one of millions that have elevated through love, laughter, pain, creativity, and authenticity.
Ooh. May we just all engage in a deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. Ooh, Selena, you killed that.
Yes.
Amazing. Wow. And thank you all so much for filling the chat box with these words. Oh,
And can I just, I'm gonna pop in here.
yes, please.
There was something so very powerful about hearing those words out loud. Like there was some, Selena, your voice, first of all, but just hearing those words out loud as a sort of commitment and a sort of stance that we can take in this moment. I was totally moved by that experience. Thank you. Thanks, Selena, but thanks everybody for your words.
Yes, yes, yes. Oof, I'm feeling so touched by the words, by the wisdom, by the love, and also the care that you poured into crafting language that fully told the story and fully told your story, our collective story. That's so powerful. And I'll quickly share that this is a lesson that I've used with students, with teachers. We changed the prompts that comes from as an education project lesson called Poetry of Defiance. And we create a collective poem. So I've included a couple of pictures here of some of what we've been able to do in person. We do sticky notes and we put the lines, and then everybody has to come in and figure out how the poem will all flow together. And I recently did this with high school students. And as on the Post-it note, it says, I can write my own story. And so when I asked them to engage in this storytelling poetic exercise, the student said, let them know that I can write my own story. So let's name, reclaim, and remember those stories and our stories.
And that's a beautiful, beautiful segue, Cierra, into the next section of our workshop. And what we're hoping to is that you'll take away from this time together some ideas that you might be able to use with your own students, with your own faculties, with your own groups or organizations, in various ways, modified in various ways, so that you might be able to take those away as tools for your own use. But many of us described in that last segment, the ways that that these last few years have been about figuring out where our sanctuaries are. And I think as teachers, we are constantly in that work of creating sanctuary spaces for our students. I think about sanctuary in the long tradition of Black people's notions and work within hush harbors. Many of you know that we come from traditions where, as enslaved people on this side of the waters, we were required to find spaces where we could be, where we could breathe, where we could dream a world that was different than the one that we were living every day, and where we could actually create space for revolutionary work, for ways to sort of elevate our struggles to actual action. There's an incredible book, and I wanted to just at least hold it up here, but it's called Hush Harbors, Praying in Secret. And it's a children's book about those traditions, about the traditions of enslaved African people who created these spaces, even with enslavement, of rest, of sanctuary, of being able to be. And part of what was embodied in those poems, at least from my perspective, was this idea that we needed spaces to be. And we are still here because we had spaces over the last few years to be. I want to read just one little section of this children's book, and then we'll go into another activity. Of course, for me, because I believe so strongly in writing, that writing can write things, we're going to do a writing exercise, but let me just read this as a beginning, and then we'll go into our exercise about creating the kinds of sanctuaries for our babies, for our children, for our families, for our communities that we need very particularly in this moment. So there's a mother talking to, or a daughter talking about her mother here, who is a person who is enslaved, Black person enslaved. And she's talking about how the hush harbors mattered. So think about this idea of how you create sanctuary, and we'll get into that in a minute. This little girl says, just the mention of a meeting made my mama's eyes glow like lightning bugs. She loves singing and praying. I heard her in the fields and in our cabin at night. I heard her in the white folks' church on Sundays too. Except there, she had to praise the Lord like they did. She couldn't call out right when the Spirit touched her. Last year when Captain Bill beat Aunt Lizzie for shouting in their church, we had to watch. It felt like he was beating us too. Now we sit still and quiet like the white folks do. But meetings in the hush harbor were different because the Lord heard us in the way he wanted. We wanted him to hear us. We could be ourselves there, almost free like, singing all the way through, shouting when the Spirit rose up in us and praying to be free. Where are those hush harbors in your school, in your organizations? I want you to think a little bit about a time when you felt, as a teacher, an administrator, as a leader, when you felt safe to bring your whole self to your work as a teacher or a leader or an administrator. What was that like for you? How did it feel if you could bring all the parts of yourselves to that space? I want you to try to describe that feeling. What did it feel like, with as much detail as you possibly can, when you yourself as a leader or a teacher felt you were in a hush harbor or a sanctuary as a leader or a teacher? So that's one question. The second question is, I want you to think about a time when you provided that same sort of care and space for a student or someone who you were responsible for. What was it like for them? What did they feel like? And again, if you can describe that with as much detail as possible. In that last description, how will you create sanctuary spaces in your organization? whether that's a classroom or a district office or an organization of some other sort. How will you create sanctuary? What are the maybe one or two concrete steps that you might take? So when you were in sanctuary, what did it feel like? Where was it? How was it? What did it sound like? All of those things. And then when you have felt that you've created that same sort of sanctuary for others, what did they feel? What sorts of things could you tell? Let you know that they were in a safe space. And then finally, how might you create those kinds of spaces? So we'll take about 15 minutes or so. And this can be narrative writing. If you like to put them in the chat, because y'all seem really good at doing that. If you'd like to put it in the chat, that would be great. If not, maybe we'll ask for a Selena, another Selena or Selena herself to come and share one or two of these stories when we finish. But what would it be like to create that sanctuary for our students? How would it feel for them? And how would it feel or has it felt for us? Does that make sense? We good? Okay, so we'll take about 15 minutes, get some water, sit and write your story, and then we'll come back together and share them.
Take about 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes.
So I hope you had a chance to write your life, RIGHTWRITE, and to think about the place of sanctuary in it. I dropped one little note in the chat, but maybe it might be easier for us to take a volunteer or two, have someone step up as we had someone step up a minute ago, to talk a little bit about these sanctuary spaces. What did they feel like? Where were they? Who was there? What kinds of things happened in those spaces? And then anything that you might want to share too about how you might create similar spaces or have created similar spaces like that for your students. I'm like Dr. Cierra now. Are there brave witnesses out there who are willing to share a story about how we create these spaces for our children, our students, our staff, our faculty, for those of us who lead? How do we do that? What are the contours of that? And what kinds of spaces have you been a part of that you would consider sanctuary? So do we have anyone who might volunteer?
This is Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer. I feel like Oprah or something right now. Hi, Jennifer. Tell us a little bit about sanctuary for you.
Okay. I ran a youth build program in my neighborhood years ago. And I was so adamant about making sure that everyone that joined me was committed to these young people. They were 17 to 25, and they had lost their way. That's the best way for me to put it. But what we created was an environment where the young people were the center of the entire agency. And we created a situation where every day we would have a group where someone from the staff would read to the group something that would help them discover a situation where they had to make a decision about their lives. And one in particular was a story that came on CNN that morning, where two young girls had fallen through the ice. One was Black and one was white. The cameraman who saw it ran to save the girls. He immediately grabbed the little Caucasian girl and pulled her out of the ice. The young Black girl went down deeper. And as she went down, something in her soul made her try 2 more times to come up out of that water. And as she reached up out of that water, it was like her whole body surged without any help to come out of that water. That story was a story that we related to our young people as, who do you think was the person who pulled them out of that water? And it took them a long time to realize that it was their initiative that made her reach to come out of the water. So it was storytelling that we used. But the standard in the agency was to make sure that the staff knew that they had to build trust, they had to build respect, they had to build a sanctuary where any one of those young people could come to them and tell them the worst thing in the world, but they could not judge. And we created that. And for that reason, we actually trained 370 young people in the Homewood Russian area to change their lives. And today we have those young people floating around as leaders in Homewood right now. So I was very proud of the sanctuary that we built. And there was not one person that experienced that environment, staff and students, that hadn't changed their lives forever. I have gone to funerals where the obituary speaks of Youthfield. I have staff members who still respond to young people and are communicating with them today.
That is a powerful story, a very powerful story of, it's called Youthfield, right?
It was Youthfield, Pittsburgh. From 1992 to 2000, we fought the gang wars in Homewood, and we won for a period of time. We did, we won.
I think there are some, I mean, one of the things that's really helpful as we hear you tell these stories, as your students experienced, is that there are always lessons within them, right?
Right.
Here's what I heard from your story, and then we'll pass it on to another person. I heard that there's something about mirroring back stories of resilience and stories of strength and stories of sources of strength from to young people and to those who we are attempting to create sanctuary for, both for them and for ourselves. There is a need to build trust, and you very specifically talked about that, the need to build trusting sorts of spaces, that people in that sanctuary must feel that there is a sense of trust and support amongst the people who are there. There's a level of respect for the traditions, respect for the culture, respect for all of the ways that people come into a space. And then I heard you also say something about this idea of non-judgment, that
Right.
in that space, if it is a sanctuary space, it is not a space of judgment. It is a space of compassion. It is a space of gathering. It's a space of inclusion. It's a space of learning from those differences. Those were things that I have. I want to make sure that we go on to another person too, if there's someone else who has other lessons to help us understand about how we create these kinds of sanctuaries. That was a perfect example though, perfect example. Other folks? Okay. All right. Well, that at least gives us a couple ideas. We've got just a little bit under 7 or 8 minutes, so there's lots of things to wrap up on as well. So, but I do think that we've got to figure out how we create these spaces for young people to be, as Jennifer told us, at the center of them, and we create those spaces of sanctuary for them. Cierra, we've got about 8 minutes left. How do we want to spend our time?
Sure. So we will just introduce Sankofa and some questions that you can leave with for your own living legacy, and then we'll stretch it out and then move through. I know another session is going to be jumping onto the line.
Perfect.
So as we talked about earlier, this symbol of Sankofa has deep meaning to both of us and of course, deep meaning to this work. And so again, Sankofa is, it is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind, go back and get it. And I just want to read something too from Dr. Dillard's book, The Spirit of Our Work. Yes, I just want to read it out loud for everyone to bear witness to the brilliance and the beauty. And so Dr. Dillard wrote, in Ghana, time was circular, based in past, present, and future, as intricate connective and collective webs of meaning making. And that has expanded the way that I think about who I am in this work, and not seeing time as something that is linear, but time as being something that is circular and being part of something much larger, of a legacy, a lineage. And so some questions to think about: where have we been? What are our lineages and legacies? How do we show up? What can we uncover and rediscover about our histories to understand the depth and the breadth of our fullest humanity?
Mhm.
And so as we think about our own living legacy, I'll pass it over to Dr. Dillard to introduce something that you can use as not homework, we'll call it heart work instead.
Yeah, so again, we'll introduce this really quickly and maybe speak a little bit about it, and then move right into our closing activity, some stretching and things. But I do want to remind folks that this work of liberation is always wrapped up in that notion of Sankofa, that if we're going to be freer, and notice I didn't say free, but freer, more liberated. This is an intergenerational work. It's work that will involve those who came before us, those who are here now, those who will come in the future. So this idea of always thinking in those ways as we craft lessons, as we think about administrative practices or policies, always crafting them with eyes towards the past and the future is our work. We had intended to have you gather an artifact that would represent that looking, something that you could have nearby, that you would always remind you that there's a past, there's a present, and there's a future that you're constantly responsible for. So the question that you might ask of your staff, your faculty, your students, is to think deeply about something that would represent that for them. And in what ways can that thing, in my case, it was a cowrie shell, in what ways can that thing help us make concrete actions that we can take with us as teachers and as administrators that really embody that legacy, right? Embody that legacy. So hopefully you'll have something like that close by that will help you remember that you are a part of something bigger than what you yourself represent. Cierra, we've got about a minute. Can you stretch us out?
Yes, let's do it. So I would invite us into an embodiment of Sankofa, embodiment of freer futures. And so if you might join me wherever feels most accessible and comfortable to you, to just reach down to the ground, stretching out the back, to remember the land, remember our foundation, the grassroots, what guides us in who we are. May we reach behind us to connect with our ancestors, our families, our communities, for their wisdom, for their guidance, for all that they teach us and all of the remembering that we can engage in. May we reach upwards towards our dreams, our freedom dreams, towards liberation, towards community, toward collectivity, towards all of the things that we hope and work for in the future. May we stretch side to side out to one another in this virtual space as a reminder of Ubuntu. I am because you are. We need each other in this work. It is people that have created structures and systems, and it is us that can dismantle, disrupt, and build something new. And last, but certainly not least, if we may place our hands on our heart, because everything that we do flows from it. It is who we are, and may we be reminded that our hearts still beat with purpose, with beauty, with joy, with resistance, and with power. With that, we say thank you so much for sharing this virtual space with all of us. Y'all are amazing. And thank you so much for your engagement in the chat and for those that have shared, Jennifer and Selena. And thank you so much to Tiffany and Cheryl, incredible ASL interpreters. Thanks, everyone.
Take good care. Thank you.